We're surrounded by all this technology that just kind of hums along in the background, making modern life what it is. But some of the most critical pieces of our infrastructure, well, they're not on the ground at all. They're orbiting hundreds of miles above our heads. So today, we're going to dig into our profound and honestly pretty much invisible dependence on satellites. So let's start with a big question. It sounds like the beginning of a disaster movie, right? What if, in a single moment, every single satellite just went dark? What would actually happen next? Well, the first thing you might picture is just total chaos. But surprisingly, the immediate effects wouldn't be quite that traumatic. No, planes are not going to just drop out of the air. And the power grid? It wouldn't instantly collapse either. The world wouldn't plunge into darkness the second the satellites went silent. The first few moments would actually be deceptively calm. And that is the real danger here. The failure wouldn't be some big explosion. It'd be a slow, cascading unraveling of all the systems that secretly hold our modern world together. Okay, so let's run a little thought experiment, one that's based on analysis from real space hazard experts. Let's just walk through a single day without any satellites and see how quickly things would start to break down. It all starts with things that seem like simple inconveniences. At 8 a.m., your morning TV news is off the air. But something way more critical is already happening. Military drones are losing contact, and secure communication lines between world leaders are dead. By 11 a.m., GPS is gone. The internet starts to slow down. Fast forward to the late afternoon, and weather forecasting is a thing of the past, forcing airlines to ground their entire fleets. And by 10 p.m., that's when the cascade really hits. Power grids can't balance demand, computer systems start failing, and the entire global food supply chain is suddenly at risk. What's so wild about this scenario is how it basically reverses a century of progress. This quote from the source material just nails it. Without those instant connections from satellites, the world doesn't feel smaller and more connected. All of a sudden, it feels vast, disconnected, and dangerously large again. So that's the big global picture. But what does a failure like this actually look like on the ground? Let's zoom in on a single farm and see how this abstract threat becomes a very real, very tangible problem. So check this out. Agricultural economists looked at what would happen to a 2,000-acre cotton farm if satellite navigation, or GNSS, went out during the most critical time of year, the harvest. And if you look at that graph, you see that massive spike in losses right there at the end of August. It shows that the timing of an outage like this changes everything. And here's the bottom line. If that outage hits during the peak week of the harvest, this one farm could lose almost $14,000. That's not some abstract number. That's a direct hit to their income, all because a signal from space suddenly vanished. And this whole thing reveals a really fascinating paradox, right? Our most advanced technology creates brand new ways for things to go wrong. A farm using autonomous robots is over $90,000 more profitable than one using old school methods. But during a satellite outage, those high-tech robots become giant, useless paperweights. Meanwhile, a human-driven harvester can at least keep working, even if it can't collect all that useful data. This brings us to the real heart of the issue, and it's something I guarantee most of us have never thought about. The biggest threat from losing GPS isn't about getting lost in your car. It's about losing track of time. We have to completely redefine what GPS actually is. Forget about maps for a second. At its core, the GPS network is a swarm of incredibly precise atomic clocks flying through space. Their number one job isn't to tell you where you are, but to broadcast a universal, hyper-accurate time signal down to the entire planet. And that is why a satellite outage would be so devastating. Our entire global infrastructure, from finance to the internet, is synchronized by this time signal. When computer networks lose that sync, even by a tiny fraction of a second, they just start to break. I mean, just think about everything that depends on this. We're talking about the internet itself, which needs timestamps to move data around. We're talking about financial markets that execute trades in microseconds, power grids that have to be perfectly balanced to prevent blackouts, even your cell phone network, the traffic lights in your city, and the local water treatment plant. They all rely on that quiet, invisible pulse from space. And look, if you think this all sounds a little theoretical, it's really not. There was a power outage recently at a U.S. time facility, one on the ground, and it caused the nation's official clock to drift by just 4.8 microseconds. That is less than 5 millionths of a second. But the high-end systems noticed. It just goes to show you how incredibly sensitive and fragile this reliance on perfect timing really is. So we've established just how dependent we are. But here's the thing. The problem is actually getting worse, not better. Why? Well, because it's getting unbelievably crowded up there. Just look at this number. In the last 6 years alone, one company, Starlink, has launched over 6,000 satellites into low Earth orbit. I mean, this is a totally unprecedented expansion, and it's creating a literal cosmic traffic jam. And that creates a huge dilemma, right? To avoid satellites crashing into each other, operators need to know exactly where every other satellite is going. But that orbital data, it's sensitive, it's proprietary, it's often confidential. So how do you share enough data to prevent a disaster without giving away your secrets? Well, researchers are now looking at advanced encryption that would let them run collision calculations on scrambled data, keeping everyone's information private while still keeping space safe.
So what does this all mean for us back here on Earth? How do we actually protect ourselves against this quiet but absolutely massive vulnerability?
Okay, first, let's be super clear. The scenario we just walked through, every single satellite failing at the exact same moment, is extremely unlikely. That was a thought experiment designed to make a point. But, and this is a huge but, that does not mean we're in the clear. Our dependence is 100% real. And while a total wipeout is improbable, partial failures, targeted attacks, and disruptions from other things are not just possible, they are a growing concern for governments all over the world. And these are the real threats they're actually planning for. First, a massive solar storm could send out a wave of charged particles that just fries satellite electronics. Then you've got the risk of a coordinated cyber attack, disabling a network from the ground. Up in orbit, a collision with even a tiny piece of space junk could shatter a key satellite. And finally, there's intentional GPS jamming and spoofing, which is already happening today in conflict zones.
So all of this leaves us with one final big question. We have built this stunningly complex, interconnected, and efficient global society. But we built it on a foundation of invisible signals beamed down from orbit. So the question we all have to ask is, what's our backup plan?